Hello, and welcome again to another edition of Facebook Evilive. Haha, from the They Came From Lodi Facebook page. And this week we have a very, very special show. We are going to, not only are we going to continue our deep dive into the Little Fiend memoir essay series from Sean Garrison, but we also have our very first interview. I guess that's how we put it. We're going to do a live on-air interview with this guy, Tony. Tony, I'm probably going to butcher your last name, man. I'm going to try not to, but it's probably going to happen. Ready? His name is Tony Matura. Is that right, Tony? I don't know if you're listening. I can't. By the way, once again, I cannot see comments because of my terrible Wi-Fi situation. Tony Matura, who was on the scene back in the day and saw the Misfits live 3 times. He was there at the Damned Misfits shows at Hurrah, and he also was at the 1979. He was at the 1979 Irving Plaza Halloween show, the one where they went all out. I suppose the one where they really made a name for themselves, if we really want to think about that for a moment. And I'm actually going to load up. I'm going to see if I can get some more pictures. Tony was nice enough to share some photos with me, which I'm going to try and share on the page here too. But I have some additional ones from an anonymous personal collection. The scans are really, really crisp and clean. So if my bandwidth, my whatever Wi-Fi connection signal holds up, we will make sure to put some of those on. Let me see if that works better. Which a better screen like this? I don't know. So yeah, that is the plan, Stan. Let's see if I could find these Misfit photos before we call. I'm going to call Tony in a few moments, and we're just going to start. You know, normally I have interview questions prepared when I've done all the interviews for this documentary, but I'm going to kind of wing it, and I know I'm going to regret winging it just because there are going to be things that I forget to ask Tony. But there will be other things that I remember to ask Tony, or I should say there will be things that I would not have thought to write down that suddenly make sense to ask Tony. So it'll be a mixed bag. Let me see here. Yeah, here it is. This is Irving Plaza. Okay, we got it. Wow, it was a really small folder of photos. Okay. Ejecting that hard drive so it doesn't lag on my system. Turn that off. I guess we could just try and call Tony right now. Although, before we begin, if you'd like to share the stream, please do. We're going to be talking, we're going to be getting a really interesting perspective with Tony. We're going to be getting a really interesting perspective with Tony because generally we don't hear much about the fan audience perspective from back then, which is what my documentary is somewhat about, except that most of the people that I've interviewed went on to start their own bands with significant following. Although Tony is also a musician, and he shared a track from his band that was inspired by the Misfits, which I've not listened to. It's called Nightmare. But I think we're going to play it, right, Tony? We should probably play that live on the air. Do you have any problems with that? It's not copyrighted, is it? See, that's the thing about sharing like video and audio and pictures. Then you get a guy like, I won't name names, but there are some people that, the moment they see themselves, they feel the need to flag you down, take down your whole broadcast for just sharing a single image. Okay. So I guess I'm just going to call this guy up right now. We're going to make this work. Oh yeah, that's what I wanted to say. So share this stream around because we're going to get some interesting perspectives. I'm putting my website here in the comments. Guys, this COVID thing is not easy. And if you could take the moment to click on my AdSense account, to click on the ads on my website, pennies will stream into my AdSense account, which subsidizes my website, which right now at this time would be really great. And the reason why I like to keep, bringing that up is because I don't want to ask people for money. I really don't. It's not my bag at all. But, it doesn't, we're literally talking about just a moment of your time followed by a single click using 3 calories, using 3 calories of energy to click that mouse button. So yeah, if you want to do that, much appreciated. I don't like the way this is framed. There we go. That's better. Oh, we lost our screen. That's worse. Come on. Some goober was like, yeah, you always have technical difficulties on your broadcast. And I was like, you try it. You try and do it every week without fail. It's not easy. Those guys that do this day in and day out, definitely requires some little bit of knowledge. All right, so let me see if I can call this guy up. Let's get this rolling here. Ready, Tony? I'm going to try calling you. And we'll play around. I'll take you off the Facebook. Let's see what happens. Really low tech here. Can you hear that? Can you hear the phone ringing?
Jeff.
Hey, Tony.
Hey, man.
All right, before we begin, Tony, let's check. Is there somebody out there in the audience? And Tony, you might be able to see the comments better than myself. Is there somebody out there in the audience that will let me know how Tony sounds at full volume on speakerphone as he's calling in? Since we're doing this super lo-fi, I'm actually going to increase the gain on my microphone too. All right, Tony, why don't you just say just say anything. Just talk for a second.
Okay, check 1, check 2.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like it sounds pretty good. I'm actually coming in too hot. See, that's the problem. I have to ride this dial.
I don't know. I can't hear it along with the what's going on the computer here because there's a lag.
Right. So if anybody could comment, I'm actually going to pull open Facebook. Let me see if I can find a comment on Facebook, because that will hamper our. And you know what? Worst case scenario, what I'll have to do is I'll have to have the conversation with you and just sort of repeat back what you're saying to me, because I'm doing this in such a haphazard way. But again, we have. Okay, here we go. I see some comments, but I'm not seeing any. No, don't have any. Anybody? Is there anybody who's watching right now that can tell us what's going on here with this thing? I guess we could just hold on. You know what, Tony? Yeah. I'm listening right now. Let's see. I might have missed you already. Oh, I can hear you, but you're super low. So you have to I want you to yell, Tony. Yell like you've never yelled before. I don't know where to even place this thing. I have the worst setup right now. This is terrible. This is not good. Oh, you know what? Wait. One. This might help, actually. Actually, that might be the trick.
I'll just continue babbling. Do you want me to continue the talking so you could get a level of some kind?
You know what? I got you. I mean, I got you here. I don't know. I really don't know how this sounds. If somebody hates it, comment. Let me know how bad it is. I'll try to reiterate what you're saying in case it's really bad. But let's just go for it, man. Let's see what happens, okay?
Sure, I guess. Yeah. I'm finding it a little difficult to hear you.
Oh, you are? Okay, what about now?
Yeah. Oh, that's better.
Oh, so yeah, this is going to be difficult. This is going to be challenging, Tony, but we're going to make it work, okay?
All right, we'll try.
All right, man. Well, listen, I appreciate your time, and just again to reiterate, so Tony was on last week's broadcast. He was commenting in the comments and was like, oh, hey, I was actually at those shows or something, and I was like, oh, whoa, that's crazy. We gotta have you on the air, man. We gotta hear, there you go. It's I mean, here I am every week talking about this band during this time. I wasn't even born yet. So it's let's get someone on who actually was there and could give his own insight into this sort of stuff. But let's not. What I don't want to. I don't want this to go on too long because I would actually like to interview you more in depthly and get your full story. So we'll just keep it. Let's keep it about the Irving Plaza show. So tell me.
Jeff?
Yeah.
We could start. Can we just start from the beginning, which was the Haraj show before that?
Yeah. Let's do it chronologically. How about that? You tell me. So what? Let me ask you this. I'll just flow with questions and I'll let you sort of fill in with your story and I may interject. I'll interject from time to time when I seem necessary. So I apologize if I cut you off. Okay.
Sure, no problem.
Okay. So when did you first hear? So it's the late 70s. You're going to shows on the Lower East Side. There's a scene. We've talked about this before. The punk rock scene. We'll probably do a whole episode on it at some point in the future. And you mentioned very specifically, either in your email or elsewhere, that they were relatively unknown. When did you first hear about the Misfits?
Right. Well, I'll tell you, it was at the Damned show at Haraj in June of 1979. I had no idea who the Misfits were. Me and my friends got tickets to see the Damned, and we were like blown away by the Misfits.
Okay, that's
it.
interesting. So tell me about how you first. Let's take it one step further back, because the Damned are what brought you to the Misfits. So tell me about how you first heard about the Damned.
Well, the Damned were one of the bigger, punk bands that were out of England at the time. It was like pretty much. The Pistols were like number one, and then you had the Damned, you had Shem 69, you had Generation X, and for us punk fans in America, in New York, when one of those bands would come over, we'd go because we loved them. Yeah.
That's great. So you go to the show. The opening band is the Misfits, and explain to me what you told me over the phone about the setup was a little bit different.
Right. I remember last week's what do you call it, a podcast or discussion or?
I don't really know what this is. I just wanted to start doing video content during the quarantine. Yeah, you know what? It is it's a video podcast about the Misfits. That's what it's about.
Okay. So in last week's podcast. You mentioned that somebody told you that the Misfits blew away the Damned that night.
Yes, that's right. I've heard many times from various people that the Misfits blew the Damned away, and I truly believe that this is when the Misfits first really became any kind of force, any sort of like known, right. Truly known on the map sort of way.
Right. I think so, because the next show was their first headlining show at Irving Plaza a few months later.
Oh, so the clout from the Damned show brought them to a place where they could play. Because, yeah, I mean, if you think about it, they're doing now next year. They did not headline. They opened up for Screaming Jay Hawkins. There were a couple other bands on the bill, but this show was the Misfits headlining, right?
Right, it was. But you know what? I mean, to talk about that 1980 show, even though they didn't headline, I think most people were there to see the Misfits.
From last year.
Because by that time, they had built up a head of steam, I think. And they weren't playing very often at all. They only, in the space of 2.5 years that I was following them, they played 5 times in Manhattan.
Right. I hear that all the time, that they just came out on the rare occasion, and they just kind of, and it's funny because they do the same thing today. They just randomly play a reunion show and get paid $1.5 million to do it. It's kind of genius.
Well, that's how it was back then, but they didn't get paid any money.
So that's very interesting. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. No, please, go ahead.
Yeah. So, the Haraj show, we had no idea who they were. we were totally blown away. And, oh, yeah, the point I was going to make, you were asking me about, was that they blew away the Damned. I don't know about that because, number one, they didn't really play on the same stage. The Damned played on the stage, and they set up the Misfits on the dance floor. And when the Misfits came on, the club was like half full. And they were great. But by the time the Damned came on, the place was packed. And they were like on the main stage. So it's kind of hard for me to say if they blew them away because they didn't even really play on the same stage. It seemed like a different part of the night.
Interesting. I guess, it's funny, that detail has never, ever, ever been mentioned before. That's why I found it very interesting. But, I mean...
Don't you love the minutia? I love minutia.
I love the minutia. Yeah, that's what this show is all about, is about the minutia. But it doesn't it recolor? It recolors, our thoughts about things that we thought were one thing and turned out maybe they were another thing. And so I don't want to say that any of the people I interviewed were their takes are invalid, but it definitely colors what they said in a different light because essentially they're kind of playing, they're not playing the exact same stage. They're playing next door in the same club, which is, I don't know. It's just not like going on right before. It's not. I guess it's not like smoking a band the way you would smoke a band if you played their stage and then you got off and the crowd was still buzzing from your set.
Right, exactly my point. And, to your point about, what people remember, this was 42 years ago.
Right.
People remember different things. So I don't want to say that those people are wrong. They could have one perspective on it that, that I remember it one way, and I'm not saying anybody else is wrong, but this is what I remember,
Do you remember, okay, a couple of questions about the Hurrah shows before we move on to the main course, which is the Irving Plaza. First of all, do you remember any of the songs that were in the set again, I understand it was your first time seeing them, and therefore maybe you would not really recall, but, figure you'd be surprised. I'd be surprised when people recall things from a long time ago after you just ask them simply up front. So do you remember any of the songs that might have been in the set?
No idea, Jeff. Actually, like within another week or two, my friend and I, we were in the band together at the time, went out and got the Bullet 45.
Where did you buy it?
So, at Bleecker Bob's.
Bleecker Bob's. So for those who don't know, Bleecker Bob's, I guess it's in the Village, right? Or it was in the Village. It wasn't quite east. It was a little bit more towards if you're
8th Street.
Right. So over by where NYU now currently resides, also right, and also. Tony, correct me if I'm wrong, that's also where the Mercer Arts Center was, right around that area.
That was a little more west off of Houston Street, actually.
Okay.
No, that's, is that west? Yeah, I can't remember it now exactly, but Mercer was more in Soho.
Real quick, the Mercer Arts Center was the place, it was the place where the New York Dolls first made their splash and they used to play it often until it, and I believe it's featured in the show Vinyl, and they show them the place literally coming down. It's the walls are caving in as the Dolls are playing Personality Crisis. But I always thought it was right there.
Yeah, unfortunately, I was a few years too young to catch that. But
right.
Yeah, I wasn't there at that point. I started going out to clubs in June of '78, a year before I saw the Misfits. I saw the Ramones for the first time.
Wow.
And,
that's amazing. So but hold on, let me. Oh yeah, so Bleecker Bob's. So Bleecker Bob's is one of the, and I've heard many a story about, fans going down to Bleecker Bob's and selling their merch. Selling their Misfits records. Or I've also heard stories of Bleecker Bob begrudgingly rebuying things at a higher price than he had sold them, because the Misfits records started to go become gold. But so you were blown away by what you had seen. You went down. You picked up a copy of Bullet. Do you remember what you paid for it, out of curiosity?
Oh, it couldn't have been more than like $1.99 or
Amazing.
or something like that.
Amazing. That record goes for
Yeah.
$2,000 or $1,500 now. It's nuts.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so
I
you,
wish I bought a bunch of them.
I know, right? So you bought the record. You're like, this was awesome. And then the other thing too is, do you remember how the Damned were received that night as well? Was it just like?
Oh yeah. They came on stage and were greeted by a hail of fucking gobs.
Really?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. It was pretty,
because they were British.
Pretty wild. I'm sorry.
Do you think that was because they were British? Because I know that across the pond, it's very common. And what Tony means by a gob, for those who don't know, a gob is a loogie that you'd hawk loogies at the band, and that was your way of applauding them, and it was disgusting. And I guess the New Yorkers who had heard about it were gobbing loogies because they thought that's what the Damned probably would want.
Yeah, and let me tell you, at one point in the show, Captain Sensible mooned the audience, pulled down his furry pants, mooned the audience, and it was like a target for Gob.
Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness! And you know what's incredible now is that I too have seen the Misfits and the Damned, except I saw them 42 years later at Madison Square Garden.
Right.
And
I was there.
Oh, you were there too. So it must have been so surreal to be like, here I am again, 42 years later, seeing this.
Yeah.
But now the Damned are opening for the Misfits, and it's Madison Square Garden.
I mean, totally just unbelievable that something like that could happen. You know, that the Misfits could play Madison Square Garden and sell the place out.
Yeah, it was an incredible show. It was an unbelievable show. Everybody, I mean, it was. We've talked about it before on the podcast. For anybody who's listening, can you tell us how the audio quality is? If you can comment, maybe it'll. I have this thing called Streamlabs, and so that's what I'm broadcasting under. But it doesn't refresh the comments, so I can't see. I have to be on Facebook, and when I'm on Facebook, my computer lags. So it's like this terrible catch-22 at the moment. But let's continue on with talking. So you see the Misfits; they're on your radar. In your circles, in the circles that you frequented or anything, do you remember any talk? Did the name the Misfits start to come up? Did you see? Oh, another question too. So the Misfits at that time, they were just walking around the Lower East Side, right south of Union Square, all through that area, and putting up posters with buckets of wheat paste to advertise that show at Irving Plaza. Do you remember seeing any of those posters, and do you remember any of your friends talking about the band then?
Well, I used to hang out on St. Mark's Place. I don't remember seeing wheat posters up, and I don't remember seeing the band around there. But Bobby Steele did hang out once in a while. And
right.
I did hang out with Bob. Used to go a few times on St. Mark's, pretty much drinking beers on the street and smoking joints.
Nice. And this is when Bobby was still in the Misfits.
Yeah. I'm sorry?
Was this when Bobby was still in the Misfits?
You know what? I think it was after he left the Misfits. When he was in the Undead, he really started hanging out more. I don't know.
Right.
Maybe that's when he first moved to the Lower East Side. Right,
because he lived there. He was kind of in many ways, he was almost like the mayor of the Lower East Side. Later on, you would...
Court.
Yeah, he would. That's a perfect way to describe it. Bobby would hold court. You would, when I met with him a few times to interview him, I would see him come hobbling down the street with his cane, and every Tom, Dick, and Harry, he waved. He knew everybody. Everybody would just sort of be like, "Hey, Bobby," and he just he would hold court, and he'd walk. We met right by Tompkins Square Park, which is where he wrote that song, and there was the riots and yada yada yada.
Sure.
And that's funny. That's funny. Yeah, I guess that's when he must have first moved down there.
Right.
Supposedly,
when around the time they played at Irving Plaza, I don't recall seeing any of them hanging out.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right, let's go into the Irving Plaza show. So tell me, and again, I know 42 years later, and it's It's like, boom, like, we're talking about something that's kind of hazy. So if you don't know something, you don't know something. I'm going to try and be as thorough as we talked about minutia. I'll try to be as minutia-oriented as possible, and you could just say, Jeff, I don't friggin' remember. Let's move on to the next thing. So you get there to the show. There were no openers.
Oh, there was. The Mad opened up.
Oh, the Mad. Okay, so real quick. So the Mad was another band. So we've spoken before about the Stimulators, the Mad, the Bad Brains, Kraut, the Misfits. All these bands were around at the time. The Fiends was another one. The Whore Lords. They were all playing around the Lower East Side, playing Max's, playing this, playing that. And this is like kind of the birth of what would become New York hardcore. And the Mad was the brainchild of this brilliant genius named Screamingmadgeorge, who was a student at SVA, School of Visual Arts in New York. And he was...
I didn't know that, okay.
Yeah. So Screamingmadgeorge would later would go on to become one of the best special effects artists of the 80s and 90s. And
wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, man.
So you told me like in that email. Yeah.
Yeah. So he did the special effects for Bride of Reanimator, Society. I think he did From Beyond. So all the Stuart Gordon, Brian Usna movies. He did The Guyver.
Wow.
He did
MacGyver?
No, The Guyver. It's like starring Mark Hamill. But yeah, he did the effects for all these movies, but when he first started out, he was more of a musician, performance artist. Would you describe, as someone who's seen the Mad, the Mad were, and they have some great 7 inches, Fried Egg, I Hate Music. Seek this music out, people, if you can find it. I believe they were on the New York Thrash compilation, the New York Hardcore, New York Thrash, and yeah, he was like, their music was hardcore punk or punk rock mixed with performance art, and he would do, he would disembowel himself on stage. He'd pull guts out. There'd be blood everywhere. He'd do all sorts of stuff. I didn't realize that he opened that show in 1979.
Yep, he did.
So tell me about it. What was that? So you go to the show. Did you know who the Mad were?
Oh yeah, I did. I saw them before.
Wow. So tell me about a Mad show. Talk to me about the Mad.
Somebody asked me once about the Mad, I think Joe Stoker online, what were the Mad like live? And I told him something like, I have to think about that for a little bit first before I could answer, because it wasn't like your normal, like, rock and roll punk show that you go see at a club where people are playing. Like you said, there's all kind of theatrics. Yeah. Film screens behind them showing like George's demented films that he made. I think they were like claymation films of like hands coming out of the ground.
Sounds about right.
And all kind of other like eyeballs being scooped out of the head, like the first 45.
Right.
Right. So you had the films going on. You had the band playing really loud, and George like screaming his head off. And it was more like a macabre theater than a regular rock show.
Amazing.
They were unlike anything else at the time. I mean, I saw them like maybe 5-6 times, and it was just like you walk out of there. It's like shaking your head. You
lucky duck! Wow. He reformed the band, and he plays. I think they play from time to time in Japan, where he currently resides. Yeah, but that's always what I hear, man. That just like insane, grotesque stuff going on, and just like
right. There was one part of the show. There would be this like woman who comes on stage with the eyeball instead of a head, like an eyeball head.
Right.
And he would like perform an abortion on stage.
Wow.
And pull a bloody fetus out of her from between her legs.
Which is very similar to. So there's another band that I'm sure Tony is familiar with, or at least has heard of, who I have sort of had a little bit of interaction with in the past personally, through Peter Crowley, the former musical director of Max's Kansas City. There's a band called the Sick Fucks, and they were very much into campy, kitschy, theatrical sort of performance in their, you know, they would have a plunger on stage when they do a song called Teenage Abortion, or they had a giant cleaver called Chop, and when they would do Chop Up Your Mother, and their EP was produced by Andy Chernoff from the Dictators. And if you've not listened to them, Tony, they're great. Yeah, Andy's great. Andy's great.
Yeah. You know, the Sick Fucks, I've heard of them, but that's one act that I never caught.
Oh, they're still performing from time to time. If you ever get a chance and you're in New York City, yeah, I've seen them twice for these Max's Kansas City events that used to go on, and they're pretty great. But they were more of a joke band. They would just get together at CBGB's and do it. It wasn't like and I think that on some level, the Mad. Again, I don't know. I honestly don't know. This is just my suspicion, was that the Mad were very much sort of like a hobby. It was more of a hobby for Screamingmadgeorge while he was in school than, say, a full-time thing.
I think it was a little more than that for him.
Really?
I think so. I think that was like he was going to art school, you said?
Right. That's why I would suspect that, personally. But, you know, what do I know?
Because they were like a pretty big thing on the scene for a stretch of time, and then I guess they kind of disappeared. But so I guess he went off to do other things. But
right.
They were like one of the most hottest bands, or acts, I guess, on the scene for a stretch of like a year and a half or something like that.
That lines up perfect. That makes a lot of sense. That lines up perfectly. With while he was in New York, while he was in school, he was, doing, this was his thing. And again, like I said, you would know way better than I, but that's just what it seems like from everything I've read and heard from people. Now
I could be wrong, so I don't know if anybody else out there has a different recollection. So feel free to tell me I'm wrong. But this is what I remember.
Right. But in any case, so you see the Mad perform, and was that your first time seeing the Mad, or you had seen them before? I know you said you've seen them many times.
I've seen them before at Max's a couple of times.
Okay, so you knew what you were getting. So in both cases, you knew what you were getting. Wow, what a double bill, man. You're like, holy crap, this is going to be a great night.
Yeah, but I'll tell you, the Misfits blew them away.
Wow. So let's talk about what was hanging in the rafters above everybody in Irving Plaza.
Hanging in the rafters? Well, they had that... they came on. This was brilliant. It was, like, so exciting to be there. As far as, like, the show, how they opened it up. They had a screen, like a white paper screen in front of the stage, and they were projecting. I thought it was. Did somebody tell you it was Night of the Living Dead that was being projected?
So no, not particularly at that show, but what I had heard, and again, probably because I think co-sponsored, or one of the times that they had done like sort of like a co-sponsored thing with the Mad Monster Movie Club from Club 57.
Right.
And they would, but I have transcribed interviews with Glenn Danzig that where he's talked about projecting Night of the Living Dead over a piece of paper, and I think Bobby has said Night of the Living Dead, but they never for that specific show. So I'm sure it was Phantom of the Opera.
Because I remember Phantom of the Opera being projected on the screen, and pretty much when the Phantom, like that famous scene where he rips the mask off his face and his hideous face is there.
Right.
And Glenn just like punched through the screen and they blasted. Just started took off like a rocket.
That's amazing. Now, at that time, you were a little bit more familiar with the set. Mm-hmm. So did you remember any particular
Well, they played like everything from Bullet. They played everything from Horror Business. Was Night of the Living Dead out by then? Probably.
Probably.
So. Yeah, they played pretty much all the stuff from their vinyl.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So they're playing that, and as we can see, I have one of the photos out. I'm sure you can see because you're watching this, right? Everything.
Yeah,
there's
right.
some pumpkins there, and there's balloons. So balloons dropped from the balloons, and 7 inches dropped from the netting that was hanging above everybody.
Really, that could be, but what I remember is that Glenn had a handful of Bullet EPs and threw them out into the audience. That's what I remember.
Interesting. Maybe I'm thinking maybe that was the 1980 show. I don't know, but I distinctly remember hearing.
Too.
Oh, you were at? Oh, what you told me?
Oh yeah.
Oh, I didn't know you were at the 1980. Oh, we got to talk about that as well.
Yeah.
So you were at Doyle's first show.
We could go on for a while.
So you were at Doyle's first show as well.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I was.
All right, before we get let's finish up on this one before we get to that one. So you hold on, I'm trying to pull up some other photos here that I have. Let me see. Let me find a good one. Oh yeah, that's great. I mean, Glenn in corpse paint. So you remember he's wearing this crazy corpse paint stuff.
You know what? I don't remember that. I don't remember.
Wow.
For some reason, that didn't stick in my head, but I see the pictures.
Right. You know it was there, but you just have no memory of it.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's one point I just failed to stick with me.
Interesting. Yeah, but there he is, full skeleton, man. I mean, this is like the coolest era of the band. Now, do you remember? All right, now here's the thing that I was referring to about also being hung around. Do you remember rotting meat hanging up, just butcher's meat hanging up there in the rafters?
I don't.
Okay, that's always talked about.
That.
There was like lamb's brains or lamb's guts or something.
Right, I read about that, but you know what? I think at the time you're like just so focused on the fucking energy that they were putting out that it was like you're in like a kind of almost euphoric state.
Right,
so
of course.
There's things you might miss about like those details. I don't know if I may have noticed. I may not have noticed. I don't know.
There's a good shot of his boot.
Like yeah.
Balloons.
But they were like really exciting and really like fucking like a steamroller.
What was the energy like in the crowd? Was there any sort of, was it violent? Was there moshing? Was there like, pogoing? I guess that would be the pogoing age.
There was no moshing yet. You know what? The first time I saw people slam dancing or moshing or a mosh pit was actually at an Undead show, like a very early Undead show.
Really? That's very interesting.
That was the first time.
Because they're considered to be one of those forefront. They're on the plaque for A7. I mean, they were one of those. They were one of the first wave of what is hardcore, considered to be hardcore, which is very interesting.
Hardcore.
Right.
Them and like the Stimulators, a band called the Violators, who nobody really ever talks about anymore.
Yes, that's Steve Haydorn. Haydorn. I'm butchering his name. I've heard they played a show with the Misfits.
Yeah, but there was those like young bands, like Harley was like, kind of like a
Harley
star
Flanagan
of the scene because he was so young. Right.
Right, he was like this crazy novelty, being like this young dude who was just like, bashing the skins for the Stimulators. But he was not the original drummer. There was another Stimulator drummer, right?
Is that right? I don't recall that. Yeah, I don't know.
Do you remember? And how did it sound? I mean, was the sound like? Were they blown out? I'm sure they were really loud, but like, did you remember how the playing was? Anything that you might recall from that?
The playing?
Yeah, I don't know.
They played great. They played awesome. They were like, I don't want to say I was going to say well-oiled machine. No, they were like kind of a little haphazard, a little like sloppy, but really good sloppy. Like not,
graciously sloppy.
Makes any kind of sense.
Sloppy. You know what I call
sloppy.
it? I call it sloppy with grace. Gracefully sloppy.
Okay. Gracefully sloppy, or how about this? Skillfully slop.
Yeah. And when I speak about that, I can't speak. Obviously, I didn't see the Misfits back then. I'm actually referring to there's a band called No Bunny who I love, and I consider them. They are gracefully sloppy, or they're sloppy with grace. You know what I mean? Like they're super. It's like a freight train, and the wheels are coming off, but they're still on the track.
Right. Good.
You know?
That's a good analogy. Right. They were like what was it? Thinking. Freight train. They were just like raucous and like they had attitude. You could tell like it exuded from the stage.
You know what?
They were just like on top of their game.
Check this out. Check this out. There's something I never noticed before, and I've looked at these photos many times. I can actually see the set list.
Really?
Yeah, ready? Hold on.
Oh, yeah, look at that. I see them.
All right, so ready for this. They played Ratfink. Yeah. They played Hell, which could be, I'm going to guess is Hell. All Hell Breaks Loose, maybe, which would have been early. It would have been early for them.
So. No, I don't think they played that song.
So what could Hell be?
Unless they had it, already were playing it, but didn't record it yet. That's a possibility.
It says Hand, and it says Devil. Oh, you know what? That might be the Mad set list.
Oh, you know what? You're right.
But above is the Misfits set list, and you can see that they played Ratfink that night. Wow.
Right.
Huh. How about that, man? That is pretty cool.
Wow, cool. Good eye.
Good. I'd never noticed that until I was just going through these photos just now. That is pretty neat. All right, here's Glenn and Bobby. Let's see what we got here. Yeah, there's Glenn and Bobby. That's pretty good.
Yeah, the one I sent you with Bobby is pretty wild too, because he has the paint on as well.
He does have paint on his. Hold on, let's pull that up real quick. Yeah. So I have clearer scans of what you sent me, so I'm going to put that up. I appreciate you sending that over. But there's a really good look, or a better look, I think. Yeah, you're right. Bobby is also wearing face paint. How about that?
Right.
Look at that. And yeah, there's cheap Halloween decorations. Those balloons, they were orange and black or something. Do you remember the colors? Probably not.
No, but that's probably right. I mean, right. Yeah, I would think for Halloween, yeah.
All right, let's see. Let's look at the other. There's one other photo with. Oh, here it is. And Glenn has this crazy smile on his face. And wow, what a show, man! I mean, what a show.
Yeah.
Let me see if
I think that was the best Misfits show that I'd seen. I saw them 5 times.
Oh, you saw them 5 times. I thought you saw them 3 times.
I saw them 3 times with Bobby and twice with Doyle.
Oh, snap. So you saw them, what? You saw them twice at Haraz and once at Irving Plaza?
No, I saw them once at Haraz, once at Irving Plaza. With Bobby, I'm talking.
Right.
Once with and at Exile in 1980, Bobby's last show.
Oh.
First show.
Oh, snap. Wow, you got to see. So you saw, that was Arthur Googie's first show, I guess.
Right.
Do you remember anything from... Sorry, go ahead.
For like 2 years, 2.5 years, every time they came, they played, and it was only 5 times.
Right. Now I understand why you said that 5 times. Okay. My mistake. I was not understanding.
Right.
So, wow, that's fascinating. So let's talk a little bit about. So we talked about Haraz. We talked about the Irving Plaza. Let's talk about the Exile, that Exile show.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Good.
Yeah. So all right. So that's on Long Island, and Bobby has said about that show that they got into they locked themselves in a closet right before they went on to really get he loves telling that story. And then they went out, and you could see photos of them at Exile, and it's pretty interesting. It's pretty cool. Hold on, I'm trying to pull up, see if I have some photos from Doyle's first show. I'm pretty sure I do in that quality, because the problem is when you share those other photos, they just won't, they're not going to show up very well. All right, so tell me what you remember. Did anybody open up for them at Exile? Or did they open up for somebody?
No, they didn't open up for somebody. They were the headliners. There were a couple of other bands. That show, I'm really a little sketchy on. I don't remember that much. my friend Timmy, who was the singer in my band at the time, was there with me. Actually, my whole band was there. But Timmy told me that they went on really late. That everybody was like, the audience were kind of annoyed that, waiting for them to come on. It took forever. That's what he said.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
And if you look at those pictures for the Exile show, you could see some like crowd shots. Actually, I'm in one of them, and I'm right in front of the stage with my arms folded.
Oh, really?
And everybody's just sort of like standing around looking. They're not like really getting into it. They're just like watching them. So
right, because they're kind of annoyed.
Has something to do with it, that the fact that they came on really late, but it was like the crowd seemed like subdued compared to other shows.
Right, they're probably all like, blown out, which kind of lines up with the whole thing that Bobby was saying about like we waited an hour.
Uh-huh.
Maybe they just didn't realize what they were doing and were just like, yeah, we'll make them wait, and then like waited too long. This is a shot from 1979 in the crowd. I don't know if you've ever seen that shot before. That is from the
it's not coming up.
It should come up right now because you're on a delay. That's why. Hold on.
Uh-huh.
So that is from the audience, and there's it looks like they're all surrounding Glenn, who's probably interacting with the crowd.
Is this which show is this?
That's 79, I believe. And you could see Irving in the background Plaza? That's Irving Plaza, because you see the railing, for the upper deck maybe.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I could be wrong, but I think that's.
I never saw this picture.
Yeah, this is from a very private collection of photos.
Uh-huh.
Yes, but that I figured this was the occasion to reveal it in the video at least. But yeah, that is the crowd at the time, or at least some of the crowd, yeah, man. So okay. So now we're talking about whatchamacallit. Let's talk about Exile. They were the last to go on. You don't remember any of the other bands you remember at all?
No, I don't. No.
Here's a picture of Tony, by the way. This is the man we were talking to. This was him back in the day. There he is. And if you notice, he has a Night of Living Dead button. Oh, why isn't it popping up though? You're not showing up here. I wonder why that is. Oh no, we lost him. Let's see if we can get him back. Yeah, no, there it is. Why is it not popping up? Oh, probably because I have to. There we go. There you are. So this is Tony, the guy we're talking to right now. Back when he was a young punk, back in the day. If you don't mind me asking, Tony, how old were you in this photo, and when you were carousing around seeing these bands?
Oh, let me see the photo. Hasn't popped up, but that's the one I think in the photo booth.
Yeah, hold on. Yeah, this is the photo booth one. You should be able to see it in a moment. Hold on. I'm trying to live produce this at the same time. It's not easy.
Right.
So that's the man we have on the phone right now. And he has a button right here. Let me see if I can get that photo pulled up. I may not have downloaded that one. But he's got a Night of Living Dead button, which might have been, you might have collected that. Do you remember where you got that button?
At a show.
Yeah, maybe it was the 1979 Irving Plaza show.
Maybe you're right. I'm not quite. Let me see.
Because those dropped. Those were the things that dropped from the netting, along with the balloons and Night of Living Dead 7 inches. So maybe, at least according to lore, maybe that's where you got yours. Who knows? You if anybody would be able to answer, it'd be you, not me. But still very cool.
Right.
So
I have on the other lapel, I have a Nevermind the Bollocks Sex Pistols button.
Right.
And I have the U.S. Ramones type of thing on the upper lapel.
Right. For that Johnny had.
Right. I would have gotten two of them, but they were really hard to find.
Interesting. So
yeah.
All right. So you saw them they played Exile, and you do you remember any of the songs from that performance particularly, or was it just more like whatever?
No, I don't really remember remember much about that show for some reason. It,
All right, you mentioned that.
me. Yeah.
Here's a flyer from that Irving Plaza show. Right, then there's the Mad. The Mad played with them. So then you saw them. So now it's 1980, Halloween of 1980, and you're back at Irving Plaza. Now, you and your friends or whatever, it's like, oh man, like the Misfits are coming back for another Halloween show. How did you hear about it? Do you remember like thinking like, oh man, this is happening again, I gotta go? Do you have any thoughts that ran through your mind?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, and we would buy the Village Voice like religiously to see who's playing that weekend, or that week,
right?
In the city. We were from Queens. We were from Rego Park, which neighbors Forest Hills,
right?
And we would get the Village Voice every week, and we would search because we were, not just casually into the Misfits, but we were like really big fans. We were like every record that came out, and we waited for every show, and there were like stretches of months between shows where we had no idea if they were even around anymore, if they had broken up, they're not playing for 5 months, what happened? Because, back then, you would expect to see a band like play at least like every month someplace. Like you could go see the Heartbreakers at Max's in 1 month, and then go see them at Hurrah like a month later, and a month later you could go see them at CB's or someplace, But the Misfits were like, so every time the Voice came out, the Village Voice, we would see if the Misfits were playing. So yeah, when we saw the ad that they were playing again at Irving Plaza, we were pretty stoked and excited.
So what is it like back then? There's no internet. You've seen them on the stage, and apart from like, hanging out with Bobby years later, it's like this band is a complete mystery.
Right, exactly. They were a mystery. It was like, just like, they were shrouded in mystery. And I guess, you know what, when Night of the Living Dead came out, it was like, let's see how I could explain it. That single was kind of lo-fi.
Right.
It's a bit murky sounding and dark. And that kind of, when we first heard that was kind of like added to the mystery as well. Because it was like, because back then, I think I told you once, they were too raw to be picked up by a major label.
Right. Right.
Because back then, you didn't hear like raw stuff on the radio. Everything was super produced. And when they came out with Night of the Living Dead, and it was like murky and dark sounding, it kind of like added to the mystery too. Like, what are these guys doing?
Interesting. So you're like, okay, so you're like, we're gonna go see them again, and you're expecting to see Bobby. Obviously, is going to be there, right? So,
right, exactly.
Do you remember being shocked? You didn't know who Doyle was? You didn't know that they were brothers, or did you?
No, I had no idea. I was expecting to see Bobby.
And all of a sudden, Doyle is on stage. Do you remember them introducing him at all, or he just was there playing?
No, I don't think they did. I don't remember it.
Do you think? So did it add something to the visual aspect, seeing a guy like Doyle on stage with his brother, as opposed to, say, Bobby, even if the playing was not?
What? In hindsight, looking at those pictures of Doyle, like especially early ones, where he's young looking, it definitely adds something now looking at it. But back then, to tell you the truth, I was like pretty disappointed that Bobby wasn't there.
Interesting.
Not only because, that's what I had known, but listen, I don't want to say anything bad against Doyle, because I think he's a great guy.
We love Doyle.
Videos of him.
No, we're not.
Like,
there's no bashing Doyle. I didn't think that. Yeah. No worries.
He's one of the most down-to-earth people that, it's like he lays it all on the table, and I respect him tremendously.
Totally understand that. No need for a disclaimer. Say whatever you need to say, however. It's not about bashing. We get that.
Right. The first show, he was bad.
Yeah, so the sound took a downturn.
I'm sorry?
So you're saying that the sound that you had seen at the previous show suddenly took a downturn when Doyle joined the band.
Yes. He was hitting like wrong chords like pretty frequently.
Well, listen, 16 years old, self-taught guitar player.
First show too.
Yeah, first show. I mean, he did the best he could.
Right, I'm sure.
What did Bobby bring to the band?
Watching it in the audience, it was like a bit of a downer.
What did Bobby bring to the band in terms of his musical ability?
He was solid, and he played the stuff very convincingly and in a very like loose kind of style that fit them perfectly, I thought. Interesting.
And
one other thing about you said about Doyle's like appearance and his image on stage. I happen to really like Bobby's image as well.
Yeah, man. I mean, look at those photos. Yeah. I mean, you could see it in those photos, man. I'll put them back up if I can find them. Yeah, he definitely adds something. It's not like their look. I mean, if anything, it definitely changed the feeling and tone and vibe of the band, but they were still a very, very interesting, crazy, weird-looking band with Bobby in his sort of... Hold on, let me see if I can pull this up. Let me find the good photo.
But I like what you said, like in one of your streams about the Misfits being like different bands.
Yeah, man.
That's like totally. I agree with that. Unfortunately, I never saw them with Francescoma.
Not many did.
The Bob, right. That's one regret I didn't discover them sooner.
I wish. I got to hear them with Francescoma, but I never got to see them with Francescoma. And I got to tell you, I mean, I that would have been, man. It's a crime. It's a crime that that there's not more out there with him in the band.
Footage,
he played on a good chunk of the recordings too.
Sure, and he sounded great too. I mean, he had his own thing going, which I guess lent a different sound to the band, and which, the Francescoma lineup is one band, the Joey Image, Bobby Steele lineup is another band, and when Doyle, it was definitely, they started turning more hardcore too at that point.
Right. I think when Doyle enters the band, they straight up become... They straight up turn into, they go from being like a punk band, like a Max's Kansas City punk band, to being a straight up hardcore band. And it's amazing how they transcend these genre and sort of like musical fashion shifts that happened in this very condensed period of time. So, so you're watching the show, you're a little let down. Did you feel overall, besides some of the playing issues, did you feel overall that like did it still hit the same buttons that the earlier shows did?
Well, not really. I mean, I'm really not one for perfection. I don't care about that kind of shit, I mean, I like mistakes, but it was just like, mistakes can be good. They're like, people are human, and they're not
organic,
machines, right? We're not
organic.
Like, but it was a little too many, mistakes and stuff. I'm sorry to say. Yeah, it was just like the show was not that great. The energy was really good from the band, but that and me being a musician, the guitar player, probably struck me more than other people in the audience who were just fucking going crazy at that. They were at that show, but for me, it was unfortunately, I wish I could have a different take on it, but that's what I was a little disappointed.
So tell me, so then you saw them one final time, correct?
Right.
So Tell me the who, what, where, when, and why, and was it was there like a decision after that where you're just like, all right, so before you get there, let's paint a picture of what's going on. So Doyle's entered the band. There's been a drop in sound quality and again, we can't just blame. So I don't feel like we can't just solely blame Doyle for this. I think it had to do with a few different factors. One of which that the boys, who under the tutelage of their producer / mysterious benefactor / mentor figure, George Germain, who was a dude who knew a lot about a lot of things. Started to teach them how to customize their own instruments, which also led to a drastic decline in sound, especially just as much from Jerry as I would say Doyle, because it's like they're both taking jigsaws to their guitars. They're both, putting in these crazy pickups. They're probably not soldering it properly. Who knows what they're doing? They're just doing all sorts of. They're duct taping these instruments back together after they smash them. So when was the last time you saw them? What year?
I'm sorry, say that again. I didn't hear that.
What year was the last time you saw them?
Well, I wrote down like a little timeline here from the Misfits Central.
Right.
And you have Exile was July 10th, 1980. The next show was October 31st, 1980. That's the one with Doyle's first show.
Right.
And the next time they played after that was October 81, a full year.
Supposedly.
Right.
Here's the thing. Misfits Central, hold on one second, Tony. Misfits Central, again, love Mark Kennedy, love all those dudes. Misfits Central is a very good resource, but it is not entirely always accurate with these things. It is very possible that the band might have had a show. It's possible. It's possible the band might have had a shows in between then. All I know is that while it's a good approximator, it is not set that we need to take grains of salt with certain things. So who knows if that 81 show was the very next show, but I had heard that over the years that sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead. Finish your point, please.
No, nothing. Just that they that at that time they were, as you said personally, that they were playing like once a year. So it's very possible that in fact 81 was the next time that they played a show with Doyle.
Mm-hmm. Well, 81. Well, I don't think they played after that Irving Plaza first show with Doyle. I don't think they played for a real long time. So I'm kind of thinking that 1 year might be true, might be right.
Right.
For the next show. Because, like I said, we used to, wait for them to play. And we went to every show.
Right. You would have been there. Had there been another show before that, you would have been at that show because you kept your ear to the ground.
Right.
That's a great, wow, that's actually a really great sort of, it's just that, you know what it is? It's just that, I've discovered so many things. I've discovered so many times in my research where what is out on the internet seems to be incredibly inaccurate. And that's why when it comes to live dates, there's always another flyer that comes out of nowhere that doesn't make sense with Misfits Central. I'm like, wait, that date is not on Misfits Central. Or, whoa, they were actually on that bill too. So it's like, there are times where, there was one show where they played with the Circle Jerks, and I don't think that was ever considered a show. So it's like they sort of just popped out. They just sort of pop out of nowhere. But you know what? In any case, so you see them probably in 81, and what was that like?
I think actually the next time I saw them was a little later. I think after the Irving Plaza show, and they weren't playing, and I sort of kind of moved on from them a little bit. I bought what is that? The first album when it came out.
Walk Among Us.
Walk Among Us, right.
And how did you feel about that when it came out?
I liked it. I thought it was a good record. I didn't think it had the balls that the EPs had.
Interesting.
It seemed a little subdued to me back then.
Right.
And at that point, I really started sort of moving away from them.
So interesting.
Especially when it started getting hardcore.
Right.
I was really into the punk scene. The hardcore early on was pretty cool, but when it got really hardcore and the moshing and the violence, and I'll tell you, there was like a lack of girls on the scene there, really. It kind of got a little, I wasn't that much into it.
Right. Yeah, I've heard that. It's just like a bunch of, that's what the hardcore movement was. Yeah, but it was also it was a bunch of young kids, and that's where like Harley Flanagan became one of the centerpieces of that sort of like, macho, sort of like we're gonna beat the shit out of you, sort of like
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, but I'll tell you, the next show I saw them, I think was probably in like '82.
Oh wow,
or something like that, which I'm almost positive it was somewhere in Midtown, and it was during they used to have these rock and roll conventions. I don't know if you ever heard of those.
Can you explain a little more about what that is?
A rock and roll convention, they would have a hotel, and they would have a big like area in the hotel where people would set up to sell records and memorabilia, collectibles.
Interesting.
They would have rooms that showed, rock and roll films, clips, which back then, I mean, you never saw this stuff. You didn't have the internet, so it's like they would show like films of the Sex Pistols, and you'd be like, "Wow, look at that! I've never seen that before," But so they used to have these conventions, and they used to have also bands playing. And it was at one of these conventions that I saw the Misfits for the last time they played. But it's not on the Misfits Central list.
So here, you just said exactly confirmed what I had said earlier, in that what you described I've never heard of before, and it sounds like, I mean, just there's one of the things that slips through the cracks, and because of people like you that like talk about this stuff, we now know that there was some show where that the Misfits played that's not on the official roster. What was it like?
I think it was probably during like the Earth AD. By that time, I really wasn't paying that much attention to them. I was like onto other things, but I do remember them. They were playing really fast, and I liked the old sound. I liked it for like what I grew up with, and that was to me like what I loved about the Misfits. And when they started to become really hardcore and fast, they lost the melody. They lost what I loved about the band was Glenn's fucking vocals, which were just like barking now.
Right. Because when you're playing that fast, and Glenn wears his crooning influences on his sleeve, and when you're playing that fast, there's no pockets of time to flesh out the melody. You got to get on to the next lyric, and so what goes from being stretching out a note turns into, as you called it, barking. And here's a question for you, Tony. At the time in your mind, can you remember, or do you think that, was there any sort of like shock or just sort of like confusion as to like, holy crap, like what happened? Like, how did they go from this to this?
No, not really. Because it was sort of like a gradual change. Like by the time like Doyle's first show, they was already starting to get fast.
Gotcha.
And then, so it was kind of like an expected sort of like, what they evolved into at the time for me. It's like I sort of knew what they were going to be like. They were really fast, and like I said, I really like melody, in songs. Like, I mean, punk songs, they're full of, like, the early ones, like, from the 70s, are full of, like, melodic, like, I turned into a monster, yeah.
Right.
It's the bad night. There's a melodic flow to it, when they did that probably in Earth AD era, it was like, that's kind of, the melody is lost.
Yeah, I mean, it's sad, but at the same time, for those who do like that sort of stuff, it was like this revolution. So it's like a double-edged sword. If we're looking at it from all sides.
I'm not faulting them or saying they shouldn't
Right.
have done that at all. God bless you. If you want to go that way, do what you want. I mean, they certainly, we're leaders of that sound, and there's certainly a lot of people who really dig that. I mean, years later now, I'll listen to some Earth AD stuff, and I like it. But back then, it was just like, and music was changing. England was like turning into, first post-punk, and then like then they sort of like Adam and the Ants came along, and all the synth stuff came along, and it was like the new romantics. So the English scene was really moving in a different direction, as well as the New York punk scene and California.
Right, which is like those are the three big epicenters of this stuff. Right. Listen, Tony, right. I'm going to move on to my next segment, but I got to tell you, sure. This was absolutely a treat, and I really we'll sit down. We got to get you on camera talking about this stuff at some point when this whole COVID thing blows over. But I figured the best way to conclude this would be, first of all, I need to ask you, your that MP3 you sent me, that's never been published anywhere. That's not on like TuneCore or Spotify, so I'm not going to get nothing's going to flag me and take my broadcast down if I play that.
No. That was like that's never. I mean, we recorded that. We didn't even finish it. We didn't mix it, and we broke up right afterwards. So I mean, no, nobody's ever heard that.
So let's play it live. Let's play it live right now. Okay? We're going to put it on. All right. Before we put it on No, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tony. What were you going to say?
I was going to say this song was like directly influenced. I wrote it when I was like 18 years old in 1979. And it was directly influenced by the Misfits, the horror thing. Even though it's not horror like movie, but I mean, it's about a nightmare, having nightmares.
And, so the song's called Nightmare. What was the name of your band?
Secret Subway.
Okay, the band's name was Secret Subway. This song, which has never been heard ever anywhere, we're gonna play it live out of honor for Tony's band. Cool. And it's a great way to just sort of play him out. And, man, listen, Tony, this was so great. So I'm going to play this.
Pleasure.
Yeah. We'll be in touch, man. You and I will be in touch. I'm going to play you. I'm going to hang up on you now, and I'm going to play the song, and then we're going to move on into Little Fiend. Okay, Tony?
All right.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you, man. Hey, and really, I enjoy your work, and I really dig what you do. It's
thank you, man. You're too kind.
All of these, especially from the really early days, like the Franche Coma and before, where nothing is known really. I really dig all your theories and little bits of stuff you put together.
Oh man, thank you. I appreciate that. I really, especially coming from someone who was around back then and saw them, and like that means a lot. All right, Tony, have a good one.
Cool, man. Hey, take care, Jeff.
You too. All right, let's turn this down just a little bit so I'm not blowing it out anymore. And yeah, man, that was really fun. Tony, I want to apologize to the audience that was listening to that if I kept talking over to Tony. It's hard when you can't, normally when you do an interview, I have to see the person too, or at least be on Skype with them. And so I'm sorry. I kept thinking about that dude. You're talking over the dude. Shut the fuck up. So sorry, Tony, for talking over you. And also, you get really excited and you want to talk about how you know about it too, and blah, 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 blah. So I tried my very best there. Sorry about that, Tony. But we're going to play his song now from Secret Subway. This is the world premiere right here in honor of having Tony on. I've never listened to the song. I don't know what we're about to hear, but we're gonna hear it right now. So I'm playing it.
Am I safe in bed? Is it just a dream? Is it just a scheme? pulses on the rise, lift your bloodshot eyes, make me see red. Maybe I'm dead. Nightmare, night scare. Nightmare, night scare. Witches are passing, priests are laughing, Satan is praying to a god in heaven. I'm being tickling frogs, I better not stop and leave me alive. I gotta survive. Nightmare, night scare. Nightmare, night scare. Nightmare, night scare. Nightmare, night scare. There's a screaming in my head. Am I safe in bed? Is it just a dream? Is it just a scheme? My pulse is on the rise. Look with bloodshot eyes. Make me see red. Maybe I'm dead.
All right. Sorry. Okay, so that was I could not hear it at first. I had to do a whole rigmarole just to hear the song. That was pretty fun, man. Nightmare, nightmare. No, that was great. That was so great, and it really has. It has such like a I don't know how to describe it. It sounds like a punk song from the 70s, man. It sounds like I don't know. It sounds great. I love it. I like it a lot. That's great. You should put that out as something on a 7-inch or something. I don't know if you have more recorded. But Tony, that was wonderful, man. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm honored that we could share it here. So let me just remove this real quick. And we're going to move on now to our final segment for today. Yeah, it's a little extra long show. I wasn't expecting that interview to go on for so long. But, you know, Tony kept it just flowed so naturally with Tony that we just went on. We're now going to dive in. Let's see how long this is. God, this is pretty long. All right, oh my God, I have to read it though. We're going to dive into Little Fiend Part 2. This is a 5-part deep dive retrospective into Sean Garrison, who's the lead singer of a band called King Horse, and his relationship with Glenn Danzig. If you missed last week's segment, go back and rewatch. It's important for this week's segment because we're continuing on. But in a nutshell, dude was in a band called King Horse that was produced by Glenn Danzig. He was signed to Def Jam. He used to be in a hardcore band called Maurice that used to tour with Samhain. And at one point, he was rumored to have been the Fiend Club president, but it was kind of bullshit. He's not really the Fiend Club president. It was just like a sort of a title that was given to him that wasn't really true. I don't know. And he just has a very unique perspective. He wrote a memoir about his very sort of like his relationship with Glenn Danzig. So we're going to continue on here right now, and I will try my best to read it. Whew. Okay, let's take a sip of seltzer before we do. Again, if you have not already, or if you're just joining us, please take a moment to share this stream around town. And please go to www.frumess.com, click on some of the sponsored ads that I have on there because it sends pennies to my AdSense account, which subsidizes my website, which I really need at this time in COVID. Doesn't cost you a dime, just a move of your mouse and a click of it as well. Okay. Ready. In my town, there are 3 kinds of people. Those who think Louisville is a southern city, those who think it is a Midwestern city, and those who know the truth, as discovered by F. Scott Fitzgerald when he visited Louisville It is neither of those things, and it has both of those things at the same time. Okay, so it's a southern city, it's a Midwestern city, and it's neither of those things and both of those things at the same time. I have to repeat this back to myself sometimes, so I am absorbing what it is that I'm reading. The customary approach among the natives is to sort of choose one of the first two false narratives and kind of run with it. In my case, I was definitely from the town that had a huge sign saying "Gateway to the South" at the Kentucky end of one of the bridges connecting us with that horrible Morador that is the southern half of Indiana. Had a huge sign saying "Gateway to the South" at the Kentucky end of one of the bridges connecting us with the horrible Morador that is the southern half of Indiana. So he's kind of like really in the middle of the country. This may not mean anything to you, Fiend Clubbers, but it is an important part of understanding why old G-Dog, my affectionate name for Glenn. So he calls Glenn G-Dog. I thought that was kind of funny. That's just his pet name for Glenn Danzig. Part of understanding why old G-Dog was always so utterly frustrated and perplexed by most of my behavior. As he always told me, weird is bad, but wild is great. To someone like me, this sentiment was pretty much the exact opposite of what and who I fundamentally am. So what you are fundamentally weird, so Sean is saying that fundamentally he is weird, and weird is great, and wild is bad. I don't know. The exact opposite. The inverse of that is weird is great, and wild is bad. But Glenn thinks weird is bad, but wild is great. To me, the weirder something was, the cooler it was. And I could just never get Glenn to admit that he was more weird than cool. So the mere fact that Sean likes Glenn and his band because he's weird and likes weird things sort of like puts him at odds with Glenn, who thinks he's wild. He's on the wild end. Glenn doesn't see himself as weird. Glenn sees himself as wild, while Sean sees them as weird, and which is the things that he gravitates towards. So it's just a conflicting shift in perspectives. It was like trying to get a dog to stop licking his balls. Fruitless. So again, to me, the weirder something was, the cooler it was. And I could just never get Glenn to admit that he was more weird than cool. It was like trying to get a dog to stop licking his balls. Fruitless. I distinctly remember a cartoon drawn by Glenn in the punk rock fanzine that illustrated the way that Jersey rednecks would give him constant shit about his somewhat disturbing appearance. I was unable to locate this gem of punk rock history on the interwebs, but it was super hilarious considering the way they described their experiences visiting San Francisco in various fanzines. Okay, so just super quick. So Frisco, as Glenn calls it, or San Francisco, there was a show where they were playing. I think Joe Biafra was there. They were playing. I forgot what other bands were on the bill. Kids were throwing beer cans at the Misfits. Googie started to chuck them back. Doyle, so there's many different... this is like the mythology of the band. One of the first rumors you hear about the Misfits when you get into them is that Doyle, a young man of all of 18, takes his guitar, his Ibanez Iceman or his Iceman knockoff, and El Kabong someone right in the friggin' dome. Like, just cracks him in the skull with his guitar. And you've heard that, like, the guy was never the same again, or that he had to go to the hospital, his head was split open. If you can find pictures of the guitar, a piece of the guitar just straight up broke off. Doyle's brother, Rocky, claims that Doyle was trying to corral someone with his guitar and sort of hit him in the head in the process. God bless Rocky, the sweetheart. I don't know. I mean, I want to say that's the truth, as Rocky was there. He was roadieing for the band on that tour, but I don't know. Who knows what really happened? It was very violent. The Misfits fought the people in the audience. They basically retreated, and supposedly Jello Biafra was there with like pitchforks and torches. They retreated. They ran off the stage. They did not finish the show, and they locked themselves in the dressing room until everybody left, and then snuck out the back, or snuck out of the place somehow. And Doyle was incredibly upset, and yeah, so the kid got el-kabonged, and it was a whole big thing. And Maximum Rock and Roll, which was a zine back then, wrote a whole piece about it and lambasted. And listen, anybody who either was there that might be listening to this or knows more about it than I do, please correct me or please add detail to what I'm saying. I'm trying to think of this off the top of my head. It's not exact and precise. But yeah, that was the gist of what happened. And the Misfits never came back to San Francisco or never wanted to, and Maximum Rock and Roll wrote really badly about him. And in this analog, pre-internet punk subculture that spanned across the United States, the Misfits were known as these meathead bullies, and there were comics that were drawn about them, with like dicks coming out of their devil locks, just all sorts of jazz like that. So that is what Sean is referring to. So going back to that, I was unable to locate this gem of punk rock history on the interwebs, but it was super hilarious considering the way they described their experiences visiting San Francisco and various fanzines. Of course, the hysterical riot where Marxist shitheads grabbed bricks and sticks and forced the band to hide in a dressing room until the cops arrived is stuff of legend. But the interviews were fucking priceless comedy considering how many gay friends Glenn and Jerry had during the early days. Okay, so, Sean writes, Sean's writing from, he's writing very firsthand as if we are going to know every single little thing that he is talking about. It is kind of hard to make some of the connections here. But so he claims, according to Sean here, they grabbed bricks and sticks. This is after the incident that I just described. They grabbed bricks and sticks and forced the band to hide in the dressing room. Again, I've heard otherwise that the band retreated to the dressing room because they were outnumbered. And the cops arrived, but I've also heard that the cops never came and that they had to sneak out through the back. So whatever, there's many different. That's the part of the beauty of mythology, right? Like, there's this side, there's that side. We don't know what the truth is. We really don't know what the truth is. I'm sure it's probably a fusion of the two. But I've heard that Doyle was very, very upset. He's just very upset. Let's just put it that way. And, the interviews were fucking. I don't know who he's talking about. The interviews, if he's talking about Glenn and Jerry getting interviewed, the interviews were fucking priceless comedy considering how many gay friends Glenn and Jerry had during the early days. So I guess in these interviews, I am not going to say this word because I don't say that word and I think it's a terrible word. And this word is. I don't care what anybody says out there. This word is now the equivalent of the N-word. So we call it the F-word. So the F-word. So Sean writes here, F-word ? Certainly there were no F-words around when they would go hang out at Max's Kansas City, which speaks to what he's saying. He's saying that Glenn and Jerry had many gay friends because Glenn and Jerry, I know Tony just said, they weren't really around until that damned show at Harrah's, but they, Tony's speaking from his point of view, which is a very valid and truth point of view, but I've heard elsewhere and from other points of view as well that, they were, but they were not really, it wasn't like they weren't known as men. They were playing Max's Kansas City in 1978 on a semi-regular basis. Peter Crowley remembered who they were. So they were there. They were just not. I think playing with the Damned is like what really sort of put them out there. And as Tony made the connection for me that I never would have made. Think about it. They played with the Damned, and the next thing you know, they're actually. They're headlining. When they would do those Max's Kansas City shows. When they would do those Max's Kansas City shows, they were one of many bands on the bill, and you've seen the flyers in the back of like the Village Voice, or whatever, those little columns with all the bands that were playing. They're playing with the Victims. They're playing with this. They're playing with that. But with after playing with the Damned, now they're headlining Irving Plaza and have the Mad opening up for them, who were just coming to prominence in 1979. As Tony would say, they were popular, which makes a lot of sense timeline wise. They were popular they were really, really, really big for like a year and a half during that the blossoming of the hardcore. And we named those bands Kraut and the Stimulators and all that. And then they kind of died off. I think they died off when Screaming Mad George left New York, and I think the band dissolved because it was something he did while he was at school. But was probably shocked that he had made such a splash, and it became more than just, maybe it was more than just a side project. In any case, so the Misfits were definitely around, and you can see there's pictures of them with like this guy Spacely, who with one eye patch, who's the star of a Troma movie called Gringo. So he's hanging out. They're hanging out with Spacely, and there's pictures of Jerry. There's pictures of Jerry with Joey Ramone. You know what I mean? Stiv Bators. So they were around. They're just not. They're not, but their band is not very well known. And at that point, they've only put out two things. They put out Cough Cool in 77. They put out Bullet in 78. Did they put out were both Night of the Living Dead and Horror Business? Yeah, in 1979. Sorry. Right. So for all of 78, all they had was the Bullet EP. That was their calling card. That's what Peter Crowley got when Peter Crowley booked them at Max's Kansas City. That's what he had. That's what he heard. That's what he was given in order to like know whether he should have this band play or not. Peter Crowley, for those who don't know, Peter Crowley is the Max's Kansas City equivalent to Hilly Crystal at CBGB's. So you had Hilly Crystal and you had Peter Crowley doing all the booking at Max's and CB's, and there was the CB group of people and there's the Max's group of people, and obviously there were a lot of little clubs in between. There's the Mud Club, Club 57. Hurrahs, Peppermint Lounge, Great Gildersleeves. I'm sure I'm forgetting a million of them. But the two main camps for punk rock then were those two sort of situations. And it's funny how even though hardcore bands the earliest hardcore bands did play at Max's Kansas City, but hardcore really blossomed at A7 and at CBGB's. And as Max's Kansas City fizzled out in the very early 80s. So Glenn and Jerry were definitely around a lot of gay people, but here they are using F-bombs. I don't know. That's what Sean's writing about. Again, we are reading from Sean's memoirs here about these guys. At that time, so let's keep all of that in context. This is Glenn and Jerry in the 80s as remembered by Sean Garrison, which is the piece of writing that we're reading. These are not our opinions. We are not making these opinions here, okay? Just reading from a memoir to get historical understanding of what but the interviews were fucking priceless considering how many gay friends Glenn and Jerry had during the early days. F-bombs, certainly there were no F-bombs around when they would go hang out at Max's Kansas City. I remember a conversation I had with him on the phone about the stupid shit they would say. So you guys got out of the van in San Francisco wearing skin-tight clothes, very carefully coiffed hair, covered in leather, sporting your big new muscles, and you were surprised when gay dudes hit on you. Do you know how fucking funny that is? So Sean is commenting on the irony of their muscle-bound appearance, their leather and their coiffed hair, and they're in the city of San Francisco and they're getting hit on by gay guys. Let me read his quote one more time. So he's talking to Glenn about this incident. So you guys got out of the van in San Francisco wearing skin-tight clothes, very carefully coiffed hair, covered in leather, and sporting your big new muscles, and you were surprised when gay dudes hit on you? Do you know how fucking funny that is? Glenn's response to that was, I don't give two fucks. Of course, he was laughing too. So Glenn is laughing as he's talking about this. I don't give two fucks was his reply. Of course, he was laughing too. This is how things went. Like Henry Rollins, deconstruction of the carefully formed facade was unthinkable to G-Dog because the truth of the matter is that it was a great facade. Facade. Am I saying that right? What is that? Facade. F-A-C with a weird little thing at the bottom. A-D-E. Is that facade or facade? A facade is like a veneer you put up. I don't know. Again, never said that word out loud. Someone please correct me if you think you need to or whatever. So, like Henry Rollins, deconstruction of the carefully formed facade was unthinkable to G-Dog because the truth of the matter is that it was a great facade. Like I said above, I considered the Misfits a tragic rock and roll story. They were cursed by bad timing, hard-headed stubbornness of Olympian proportions, a basic working-class Italian upbringing, and the fact that poor Glenn knew that his ideas and his songs were great. Interesting. So what makes the Misfits a tragic rock and roll story? They were cursed by bad timing. They had hard-headed stubbornness of Olympian proportions, a basic working-class Italian upbringing, and the fact that poor Glenn knew his ideas and his songs were great. So Glenn, knowing his ideas and songs were great, probably fueled hard-headed stubbornness of Olympian proportions, compounded with the fact that, you know, they were a working-class Italian upbringing, hard-working people, hard-working, blue-collared people. So they were willing and able to put in the work that it took to rehearse and practice and do shows and do everything that's involved with making a band. And the fact that bad timing, as Tony mentioned, Tony said, and this was a very interesting perspective that I never thought of, because last week Sean was bewailing in his memoir about why weren't the Misfits on the radio? Like, how crazy is that? And Tony's response, Tony's rebuttal to this is this week, from what I gather, you know, it's not like he's responding to Sean, but in a way it kind of complements what Sean is saying, or doesn't compliment it, in the fact that because there was nothing raw on the radio at the time, you could only have polished songs. You could only have something that was properly recorded and polished in a studio that would get airplay. So you're not going to have like rough, raw, you know, press that bullet right about on the street, you know, playing on the radio. Bad timing. Glenn was acutely aware that music that lasts is grown underground and is generally intolerable to the typical American music fan. That is, wow, what a wonderful, what a very, very insightful perspective that Sean has. He's right. He's right. Well, at least this is his perspective, what Glenn's perspective was. Glenn knew that his ideas and his songs were great. He was acutely aware that music that lasts, so the music and the Misfits music has last, right? It's grown, it's last. They're incredibly influential. It's grown underground, and that's what happened in the 80s. The Misfits died, and then the music grew underground to astounding proportions that was further amplified by the biggest band in the world, Metallica, wearing their shirts on stage and in videos and stuff, and furthermore is generally intolerable to the typical American music fan. Why is that? Because anything that is good, as Sean only likes things that are weird, anything that is good, shit, I just lost my place. Anything that is good, anything that is worth its salt, anything that is truly wonderful is not going to be liked by everybody, because what's liked by everybody is generally shit. Why? Because it has to appeal to a massive demographic, and when things have to appeal to a massive demographic, they're stretched really thin and they get really bland and they're really boring. And anything that's liked by a couple of people is probably going to be way fucking cooler. And plus, it's part of the you know, what makes the whole idea of having a secret club so appealing. You know. He was right, of course. He was right about almost everything, and that's why over the years he just got more and more pissed off. So Glenn was right about almost everything, and that's why over the years he just got more and more pissed off. When I was with the Samhain guys, people only wanted to ask about the Misfits, and it was almost tragic to watch. So Glenn breaks up the Misfits. He's doing Samhain. Now all anybody ever wants to talk to about is about the Misfits. After Glenn is done with the Misfits, Glenn's poured his heart and his soul and his blood and his sweat and his tears into the Misfits. Nobody wants to give him the time of day. And now that they're no longer, and that's the ultimate tragedy of Glenn Danzig, in how he became grumpy Uncle Glenn and now grumpy Grandpa Glenn. Although he's lightened up over time. I was certainly guilty of this crime, so Sean himself would ask all the time about the Misfits stuff during the Samhain days. I was certainly guilty of this crime, but for some reason, he did not find me irritating at first. I'm getting ahead of myself again. Sorry about that. So Glenn would entertain these questions that Sean would ask. Something happened when Doyle joined the band. Woo! This is a big one. All right, so this is also going to speak to everything that Tony was just saying on the line. Something happened when Doyle joined the band. Look, this is what I mean, Tony. I'm telling you, I hear some of the things I hear from so many different people that I either speak to or I interview, and it's like all the running threads make me think, oh, this is the truth, you know? And so the fact that what you said and what he says, they're the same thing, so it must be true. Two completely different perspectives from two different times, from two different timelines, and two different geographical areas. Something happened when Doyle joined the band. Look, I'm sure that Doyle is a nice guy if you know him well, but in my opinion, he just can't fucking play. Doyle, I love you and I think you're great. And it's probably about to get really rough right now. He just can't fucking play. His guitar sound is shit. He is sloppy and careless. He seems more interested in posing and flexing than playing well, and brought a whole new level of New Jersey jockism to the table, which was probably fun for the band to unleash on the world, but just made them a complete joke as a live act. And you can hear in Tony's comments, listen to what Tony says. What does Tony say? You know, Tony's like, I was expecting to see Bobby. He was not there. And here's Doyle in his place, and he just doesn't, the sound isn't good. And suddenly Tony is very, oh shit. No. Oh shit. Sorry. So weird to hear yourself as you're trying to talk about something else. Let me turn the volume way down. So Tony sees that Bobby is not there. He hears that the band does not sound that great, and suddenly Tony is pretty much lost the interest in keeping track of the band, right? So again, as Sean says, something happened when Doyle joined the band. Look, I'm sure Doyle is a nice guy if you know him well, but in my opinion, he just can't fucking play. His guitar sound is shit. We talked about why that is. And again, it's not just him. Again, too much blame on Doyle. Let's blame Doyle and Jerry. And you know that Glenn didn't have any say or opinion on the way their guitar tone sounded when they played live, because those guys were in charge of that shit. That was their fucking thing. They're probably like, Glenn, fuck you. He is sloppy and careless, and he seems more interested in posing and flexing than playing well. And you can see that in all of the fucking photos there's so many photos of Doyle posing in just the right way. And not that Jerry isn't posing, but I kind of like could see what he's talking about when I look at those photos on the internet and stuff. They brought a whole new level of New Jersey jockism. And it made them a complete joke as a live act. And it seemed to not matter, because by that point, they're switched over to the hardcore scene. Hardcore kids are, there for the intensity and ferocity as much as they are there to hear the music. A part of it is the live experience, the catharsis of going apeshit and crashing into each other and moshing, all the things that turn Tony off. And he also mentioned that girls stopped showing up, and that's true too. It's like the hardcore scene was a boys-only scene. It was a boys-only club full of, meatheads beating the shit out of each other. And what better focal point for that than these two twins of evil with Glenn in the middle, singing. Yes, he is the perfect embodiment of the Misfits look, which is what the Misfits started to care about more. But everyone knows that Glenn played the guiding guitar tracks on both 12 Hits from Hell and Walk Among Us. While a lot of early fans maintain that the sheer volume of their later sets kept the band from being able to stay tight, I must unfortunately call bullshit. Bullshit. So he capitalizes that bullshit after he says bullshit. So let's take that back again. So Glenn, and yes, if there's an interview in Alternate Guitar Magazine, if anybody can find that, where Glenn is talking about, there's a lot of different guitar tracks on on Walk Among Us, and while Doyle is playing on those tracks, Glenn's laying down the guide and Doyle's thickening it up. I don't give a rat's anus about the 1981 footage from Bookies, which is a very popular, it's the earliest known footage of the Misfits available publicly is from 1981 from Bookies in Detroit. And you can find, it used to be utter garbage, but there are some pristine copies that have popped up over the years. And Doyle's live playing just goes downhill from there. So people have said to Sean clearly, and that's why he's saying this right now, that, Doyle sounds reasonably okay in 1981, at least compared to 1982 and 1983. So, and I'm sure if we had interviewed Tony years and years earlier and his memory was not recalling from 42 years ago and maybe only from 3 years ago, maybe if we were interviewing him in 1985, he could probably say better that Doyle's playing at that first show with Doyle was a hell of a lot better than the playing, at that convention show that he saw them at. But who knows, man? And again, Tony's perspective is interesting because Tony saw them at such a pivotal transitional point from the Bobby Steele horror business version to the Doyle hardcore Walk Among Us version. He got to witness that shit live, So Sean doesn't give a rat's anus about the 1981 footage. Doyle's live playing just goes downhill from there. If you watch later footage of the band, Jerry holds his bass vertically half the time and is just sloppy, flailing away. So maybe someday if I can properly stream the footage without getting too many drop frames, you'll see. You'll see. Do I have anything? So here is like Jerry. This is like Jerry in every video. So yeah, he's playing like, if you could imagine this is lower, he's playing, and then all he does is go, ah! That's what he's doing. That's what Jerry's doing. He's holding it out vertically, and he's going, bum, rum, 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 rum. The vacuum cleaner in a blender going, rum, 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 rum. It's Robo that kept the songs from completely flying apart into a massive steroid-fueled, hysterically funny musical sauerkraut. Ouch. So he's crediting Robo for keeping them on the tracks, as Tony said, and we talked about. Well, he was talking about the '79 band, but even later, the human organic element that adds slight imperfection that adds to the performance was suddenly way out of control, and you have the band is literally like a freight train going 1,000 miles an hour, barely holding on to the track as Robo is trying to keep the rowboat going. If you were to take Robo out of the equation, what do you think those live sets would sound like? Absolute goat manure. Now, I don't give a flying fuck. Wait. Boy, his stream of consciousness in his writing, okay, I'm going to try and say this in one sentence. Ready? Now, I don't give a flying fuck at a rolling donut. I don't give a flying fuck at a rolling donut. That's what he's saying. Absolute goat manure. Now, I don't give a flying fuck at a rolling donut, what Glenn was saying at the time. His famous quote, I think from the set at Al's Bar. And here's the thing, and there's many of these famous quotes from the bootlegs. And so if you're a real fucking fan, like if you're a real fucking Misfits fan, like a true fan of this band, you know, when you hear another person across the room say, if you don't know what this song is, then what the fuck are you doing here? Or the other one is, we pound these things like jackhammers, or when they're tuning up, or another one is, I think you want me to throw firecrackers at you, something like that. A lot of great live things, and as you know, there's the alternate lyrics to Bobby Steele lyrics to Teenagers from Mars, and there's Glenn today during the reunion shows going, do you like my fucking pump? Oh, that's something we never, Tony, I did not ask you, we did not compare and contrast what it's like to see the Misfits at Madison Square Garden and what they sound like today with Doyle and on the stage, and versus seeing them in 1982 or 1980 or 1979. That was one thing we did not really dive into, which would have been good. But if you have any comment on that, please put it in the comments for this for right now. So now I don't give a flying fuck at a rolling donut what Glenn was saying at the time. His famous quote, I think from the set at Al's Bar in L.A. We don't fucking care about making mistakes. Fuck that shit. If you want that shit, go see some cock rock band or some shit. Is probably one of the funniest things he ever said from the stage. I am not saying that, in my opinion, he was actually embarrassed by how sloppy and unprofessional they had become. No, I'm saying that he was extremely embarrassed by Jerry and Doyle because he told me straight to my face that he had been. So this is interesting. So post-mortem, after the Misfits break up, and Sean is friends with Glenn during the Samhain times, and as Curtis, who has said in the past, you know, you could, back in the 80s, you could get a hold of Glenn's number and you could call him up and he would just talk to people on the phone and answer any of their questions. And, you know, and while I've never spoken to Glenn, I have spoken. I'll never forget when I got Peter Crowley's number, who's the guy, that guy I was talking about earlier from Max's Kansas City, this legend in my mind, equivalent to Hilly Crystal, who it's criminally insane that he's never published a book, who I called, that like told me to call him late at night and sat there and spoke to me till 2 a.m. talking to me about music and rock and roll, didn't know me out of a hole in the wall, and just loved to talk about music and things. And I feel like Glenn was one of those types of guys, when I hear about how he could just call him and he'd talk to you on the phone. In the same way that the Dead Boys, Jimmy Zero once told me that they would call up James Williamson, who they revered, the guitar player, the latter guitar player for Iggy and the Stooges during the Raw Power era. And they just call him up just to pick his brain and talk to him on the phone. So again, you know, Glenn talks like this. We don't fucking care about making mistakes. Fuck that shit. If you want to see that shit, go see some cock rock band or some shit. It's probably one of the funniest things he ever said from the stage. I'm not saying that, in my opinion, that he was actually embarrassed by how sloppy and unprofessional they had become. No, I'm saying that he was extremely embarrassed by Jerry and Doyle because he told me straight to my face that he had been. So Jerry and Doyle, they're working at their dad's factory like crazy. You know, they're working at Pro Edge. Jerry and Doyle's father, Jerry Sr., Jerry Caiafa, I think first, although, yeah, because Jerry Jr., a.k.a. Jerry Other, I guess he'd be Jerry the Third. Although maybe Jerry's grandfather was also Jerry, so maybe he's Jerry the Fourth. I don't know. Jerry Caiafa went to Lodi High School. He went to high school with the guy who runs Benson, who runs Cardi Sugar Bowl. Went to high school with Jerry's dad. Jerry's dad was I think he had patents or something. He had contracts with NASA. They used to make X-Acto knives. It was a machinery plant, and it was a very, 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 I think the business has since gone the way of the dodo, but those guys would work in this shop, and that's how they would fund the band. You know, they'd fund recording sessions, and they would, in addition to having financial backers like George Germain and the t-shirt money that would come in, they would machine. That's how they would get these jigsaws and machine chop the shit out of their guitars. They made, and eventually when they left the Misfits, they would become, their next band, Christ the Conqueror, was sort of like a guitar workshop, in the sense that they learned how to really make their own guitars and then write songs on them. Because those songs that they play and those songs from the 90s and stuff, they sound more like metal songs because kind of the guitar tone that they have a little bit. So in addition to just, you know, wanting to move in a more metal direction that they did, their instruments were kind of built for it. I don't like the way those guitars sound at all. I don't like the way the Devastator and the Annihilator guitars sound. I don't think they're good. But the reason why I bring up the machine shop is because that's what Jerry and Doyle had gotten working full time. Those good, hardworking, blue collar Lodi boys, or even though they came from a well off family, are working in their dad's shop. And then, you know, doing the band. and they started to get sloppy. Things started to get sloppy. They didn't want to do shows because they were too busy working, which might be one of the reasons why they never played out as often as they could. Tony says they were great at MSG, but hard to compare with the early 80 version, a different band again. Misfits Mark 8 or 9. Well said, Tony. Well said. So Glenn was extremely embarrassed, though, by the direction that the band was going. They're playing faster, they're getting sloppier, and it's just not working out. So he says he told Sean straight to his face that he had been embarrassed by Jerry and Doyle. Yes, and that brings me to the famous question about whether Jerry and Doyle were coked up like disco dancers during the last year of shows. Okay, so again, I am just reading from a fucking memoir. I am not saying that Jerry and Doyle were on drugs. I don't know if they were. There are other sources out there that talk about this. Again, I'm just reading what's written on the stage. I am not saying that this is fact. I have no fucking idea. But I'm just reading this because it's an interest. This is a perspective of a guy, Sean, by way of Glenn, back in the early 80s. Let's just give it the context of what it is. I don't know if Doyle was into that shit, but many, many, many people told me that Jerry was. So Sean is claiming that many, many, many people told him that Jerry was super coked up in that last year. It may be some complete fucking bullshit story to explain the ridiculous guitar smashing, inability to tune their instruments, and general lack of musical tightness, but it doesn't really matter because I have no proof for half the shit I am telling you. I can only relate what I heard with my ears from the mouths of very depressed, angry, and frustrated musicians and fans, because back then, happy people had no interest in punk rock. So even here, he is posting a disclaimer that he doesn't know if Doyle and or Jerry were coked out in that last year, but he is also explaining that this is what he heard from other people. So this is like fifth-hand information here. Let's take that with a grain of salt. So perhaps now you can grasp why the Misfits are a tragedy of sorts, and this story needed to be firmly implanted in your mind because their misfortunes and missteps are entirely reflective of 99% of what happens to all American bands. Let me say that one more time, because again, Sean is an eloquent writer, but he likes to convey very complex thoughts in long sentences, and I don't know about you guys, but me, I need to read the sentence a time or two again to really sort of marinate in what he is saying, because I'm not picking it up. So perhaps now we can grasp why the Misfits are a tragedy of sorts. And this story needs to be firmly implanted in your mind because their misfortunes and the missteps they took are entirely reflective of 99.99% of what happens to all American bands. So let's just say for a second. So let's put this in additional perspective. So not only are you a band, you're a band that's made it, right? Or made it to a point where you have a following. You could do it in a semblance of DIY professionalism. That's what we'll call it. It's not straight up professionalism. It's DIY punk rock professionalism, which I would say the Misfits were doing, right? And even there, think about all the bands outside of that realm that don't get to the spot where the Misfits had gotten through hard work and doing everything that they were doing, that they fall into this 99.99% category. A lot of bands fall into this 99.9% category. And the way that Sean writes it, he's really talking about all American bands are 99.9% of this category. Are entirely reflective of 99.99% of what happens to all American bands. Timing is everything, and the fucked up truth is the Static Age was recorded in February 1978 and was being considered by various labels for release, but in October, sorry, I'm having a terrible time reading this. Let me say this one more time. So the missteps. So the Misfits' missteps and misfortunes are entirely reflective of 99.9% of what happens to all American bands. Timing is everything. And the fucked up truth is the Static Age was recorded in February 1978 and was being considered by various labels for release. But then in October of that year, it was pretty much a foregone conclusion that everyone in America playing punk rock was never going to get on a real record label because all the fucking English idiots who had, Jesus Christ, this is such a, it's not a run-on sentence, it's just such a long thought. Timing is everything, and the fucked up truth is that the Static Age was recorded in February of 1978 and was being considered by various labels for release, but then in October of that year was pretty much a foregone conclusion that everyone in America playing punk rock was never going to get on a real record label because a fucking English idiot who had moved to New York City passed out in the Chelsea Hotel, and while he was on the floor drooling in his idiotic this is really poorly written. I'm sorry. This part is really poorly written. This is the longest fucking sentence in the world. I can't even read it. So look, Static Age was recorded in February 1978. It was being considered by various labels for release. In October of that year, nobody was going to be able to get on a real punk rock or a real record label because Sid Vicious had passed out in the Chelsea Hotel, and while he was on the floor drooling, his idiotic whore of a girlfriend was stabbed by a heroin dealer. Okay, but we don't know. Okay, but we don't even know if she was stabbed by a heroin dealer. She might have been stabbed by Sid. We don't know. No one knows. No one knows what happened. Point is that after she died, after Nancy Spungen died, all of a sudden, labels were no longer considering punk rock. Man, we should have talked about this. I would have loved to hear Tony, we're saving this for our interview. I'd love to hear your opinion on that as well, Tony, about that. Do you agree with that statement made? Thanks, Sid. I'm not going to try to reread that sentence a fourth time for the impatient people watching this, if there are any. I feel terrible butchering that as I did to begin with. The Misfits were ahead of their time and were sabotaged by the historical time period they existed in. Wait, but there's more. All right, I'm going to try and read this one more time. Ready? Timing is everything, and the fucked up truth is that the Static Age was recorded in February 1978 and was being considered by various labels for release, but then in October of that year was a pretty much foregone conclusion that everyone in America playing punk rock was never going to get on a real record label because a fucking English idiot who had moved to New York City passed out in the Chelsea Hotel, and while he was on the floor drooling, his idiotic whore of a girlfriend was stabbed by a heroin dealer. Thanks, Sid. Because, you expect the sentence to end like in a logical place, and it just keeps going. And I keep looking here and then looking back to read. That sentence was nonsense. The Misfits were ahead of their time, and they were sabotaged by the historical time period that existed then. Wait, but there's more. If you want to understand the full story here, there's another aspect to this tale that you probably can't grasp fully unless you were there, but I'm going to try and make you understand it. Ready? In 1982, a fanzine appeared called Maximum Rock and Roll. We just started talking about Maximum Rock and Roll. Okay. So now he's probably going to explain it a lot more eloquently than myself. Or at least more context as to the zine that lambasted the Misfits after the San Francisco incident. A fanzine appeared called Maximum Rock and Roll that from the beginning waged a passive-aggressive war on any and all bands that didn't subscribe to their full left Marxist views. This fucking magazine single-handedly killed American hardcore because its hippie fucking editor, Tim Yohannan, born in 1945, had absolutely no sense of humor and was too fucking idiotic to understand the words fun and irony. His first rag was called All the Drugs You Can Eat and was published during the start of the Nixon administration. Yes, in the same year that great records were falling from the sky like rotten lemons, a fucking hippie decided he was going to single-handedly take over an entire subculture, but instead of taking over and controlling the narrative of what American punk rock was supposed to be, he only succeeded in pissing off 75% of the bands and fans to such a degree that within 2 years, every band who was still together either changed dramatically or broke up from sheer miserable frustration. So Sean is breaking up Sean is blaming Maximum Rock and Roll for 75 of the percent of the bands changing or breaking up out of miserable frustration. You see, if punk rock was telling other people what to do and how to live, a lot of us decided that punk rock was lame. And the little Mohawk sporting clones were the enemy. And that's interesting because that's what it becomes, right? Like, it becomes, they become Mohawk sporting clones, It becomes, when a subculture reaches the mainstream and is no longer a subculture, is now a part of the mainstream, and therefore needs to have criteria that define what it is to be something, whether you believe in its, what's it called? Whether you believe in its dogma or not, right? Or it's whatever, it's thing or not. And so everybody now, all the hardcore bands are becoming cookie cutter, and you have everybody is wearing a mohawk, and that's what makes you punk if you're wearing a mohawk or a leather jacket or this, that, and the other. The Misfits definitely caught up in yet another shitty vortex of stupidity. And like dozens of other bands, they just decided to turn up every aspect of their identity that did not conform to this new political dogma to 11. So Maximum Rock and Roll comes in, starts like, attacking everybody. And the Misfits, he claims, in another shitty vortex of stupidity, and like dozens of other bands, they just decided to turn up every aspect of their identity that did not conform to this new political dogma to 11. Bands like the Bad Brains, the FUs, Black Flag, the Meat Puppets, Husker Du, and many others, just decided that anything that was going to piss off the assholes at Maximum Rock and Roll was good, and that anything that placated those preachy hippie fucks was bad. In my opinion, this is what caused the Misfits to start doing stuff like call homosexuals F-bombs. There you go. So he thinks that the sudden shift in the Misfits using that sort of language was to piss off Maximum Rock and Roll, that there was no problem as they were fixtures on the late 70s New York punk rock scene where there was many a gay person constantly, and suddenly started to amp up this part of their personality, which happens to coincide with the hardcore punk, sound and circles that they're starting to run with. So it all sort of just blends together, I guess. In my opinion, this is why the Misfits started to do stuff like call homosexuals F-bombs, started doing steroids, conjecture, and listening to Van Halen much as possible. I think those last two in particular are aimed at Jerry and Doyle. Jerry, particularly Doyle, was a huge Van Halen fan. Huge. And even wanted to musically go in that direction, and might even possibly be part of the reason why Earth AD is so fast instead of the slow, atmospheric record that Glenn was hoping, or that Glenn had a vision for initially, supposedly. Both the Misfits and Black Flag got completely carried away with this shit, writing songs and saying idiotic but funny crap in fanzines that would bum out any and all people who thought that Jello Biafra was some sort of prophet, which is also fucked up because Jello was friends with those guys, but he was not friends with the Misfits. Jello hated the Misfits because of the El Kabong incident that happened in San Francisco where Doyle cracked the guy over the skull with the guitar. Anyway, the way that fucker Tim Yo was telling every punk in America how to think certainly didn't help the first wave of bands see that the punk rocks. Sorry, again, dude, the way this dude writes, it's just the sentences are so fucking long. I keep expecting there to be a period. Anyway, that fucker Tim was telling every punk rock in America how to think certainly didn't help the first wave of bands see that the punk rock scene was something to be embraced anymore. In fact, most of them started looking for the escape hatch, including your humble narrator. So the Misfits broke up, but that wasn't the end of G-Dog's frustrations and misery. The moment that the band split up, all of Glenn's pals in punk rock, in the punk rock scene, started tape bootlegging any and all Misfits music that Glenn may have given them out of friendship, because for all of his faults, Glenn Danzig is a generous motherfucker. So, yeah, so even as far back as the Static Age, we talked about this last time, mixed down tapes would get made, whatever, tapes that Glenn had. Glenn would give these things to people, not expecting them to be bootlegged. And no wonder later on when people would come and get that shit signed, he'd be like, I want to break it because these people have it because I gave it to them, and it went and got bootlegged. The moment that the band split up, all of Glenn's pals in the punk rock scene started tape bootlegging any and all Misfits music that Glenn may have given them out of friendship, because for all his faults, Glenn is a generous motherfucker, and I've heard story after story where that is incredibly true. He gave away stuff because he liked doing it. And all during 1984, everyone basically betrayed his ass and started copying anything and everything that they had promised not to copy. And I think I think that speaks to a larger sense of their culture, of the Lodi Italian New Jersey culture of, like, just there's a generosity that comes with being like Italian. I don't know what it is, like this gregarious generosity of like wanting to like genuinely make someone's day and give them something or do something for them. And again, you hear Jerry doing this all the time. You don't really hear much about that from Doyle, but you hear about it from Glenn a lot. So I think that is, and in my experience with Lodi Italians, and I've had quite a few experiences with a bunch, that has always been the case. Just fucking salt of the earth, wonderful generosity. So here's Glenn handing out, tapes, man. He's handing out all these fucking tapes, giving them to people, friends and whatever, and they're fucking bootlegging that shit. And that happened during 1984. It was pretty fucked up, and I myself had a watered-down copy of Static Age, mentioned above, that Barry from the Necros had first copied, no doubt saying to the next asshole, you have to swear that you won't copy it again. And that goes back to what we spoke about last episode, where one person bootlegs this tape or copies this tape, which copies this tape, and it warps the timing of the track and yada, yada, yada. So Sean got his Static Age tape from Barry and the Necros overall. And you've heard of Todd Swalla. His name comes up all the time when talking about the Misfits, because he was almost like the ceremonial. He was almost like he was like a fifth member, in the sense that he was always filling in for the drummers. When they were in a pinch, they'd call on Todd because Todd knew all the songs, because Todd was such a huge fan. So Corey, Barry, Andy, and Todd from the Necros were huge fans. Corey Rusk, the bass player, who is part of Touch and Go Records, had a U-Matic camera. And when they were in Toledo, they're from Toledo, Ohio, and when the Misfits were out that way, Corey filmed a music video for the song Night of the Living Dead, where the Misfits were parading around a cemetery somewhere in Ohio, knocking over tombstones. No one has ever seen the U-Matic tape, but pictures, stills from that video have been used for Misfits flyers back in the day. Pretty freaking cool stuff. So the Necros were like a brother band to the Misfits, and were huge Misfit fans, and very much Fiends, like the first wave of Fiends. And they were young fucking guys. And great, just a great hardcore band. Man, those dudes probably have incredible insights, and they were there. They toured with them. They were there for the New Orleans grave robbing incident, and just they were there at the last show. They played the last show with the band, and Todd had to fill in on drums. He played the last show because their drummer brain damage. Oh, that's something we'll unpack someday. The brain damage point of view of that show. And it's sad. Russ Gibb, who was a DJ, who supposedly coined the whole conspiracy that Paul is dead. He died, man, but I got to talk to him on the phone before he died, and the Misfits stayed at his house for that last show. And he had a story about them sitting around the table and eating breakfast and nobody saying a word to each other. Although apparently Glenn was ready to leave the Misfits or had broken up and left the Misfits prior to that show, even though there was supposedly a Germany tour planned to support Earth AD. But he had broken up he had already been ready to leave the band after the Great Gildersleeve show and was doing one last commitment, because they knew there would be such a loyal, hardcore following out in Dearborn, Michigan, where they would play from time to time. So basically everybody's bootlegging. Barry's giving this tape over to our narrator here, Sean, and you swear you won't copy this tape again. By the time I got a hold of it, the guitar solo in Some Kind of Hate sounded even more like a saxophone, which blew my fucking mind. That's crazy. So as we were talking about, dubbing from tape to tape to tape, the song is warping, the timing is warping, and he says that and you can still find them. I have them somewhere on my computer, because what happened is those tapes would then be put out as 7 inches, man. People would make 7 inches from these bootlegged tapes that had been bootlegged 10 times. And then they called them the Static Age demos. And they sound like they could be whole new recordings because they sound so warped. And so he's saying that the guitar solo in Some Kind of Hate sounded like a saxophone, which blew his mind. We were convinced that it was a saxophone, and that made us like the band even more than we did before. Amazing. The mythology, the imagination, like there's nobody knows anything, I don't know. It's just so interesting. So I guess it was early 1984 when my pal Julian Bevan got his slimy mitts on a stolen calling card number and Glenn's home phone digits, and we started calling him and asking him all kinds of stupid questions. Interesting. So his pal Julian got his slimy mitts on a stolen calling card number. What does that mean? Was it a calling card, like the way you used to have a calling card if you wanted to call something and it had money loaded on it, and Glenn's number was on that calling card, I guess, whatever. And they would call him, and they'd ask him all kinds of stupid questions. This was the beginning of and he puts in quotations, my friendship with G-Dog. We were both very excited about the new band that Glenn was supposed to be forming with the guys from Minor Threat, even though it sounded like a combination of dudes that would never work together in a million years. Sorry, I misread that. Glenn was supposed to be forming guys, I'm so sorry. My reading sucks today. We were both very excited about the new band that Glenn was supposed to be forming with the guys from Minor Threat, even though it sounded like a combination of dudes that would never work in a million years. So that's the end of Little Fiend Part 2. And that's his beginning. So he first started to really talk to Glenn, I'm guessing, it sounds like the fall of 83, right? Or maybe early 1984. He has befriended Glenn via stolen calling card, and they're calling up Glenn just to talk to him. And back then it's like, what is it? It's like Friday, Saturday, Sunday night, or, whatever, in the middle of the week. You get home from school, or they're just like, whatever, just a couple of kids just shy of 20 or just under 20. And what do you do to entertain yourself? You pick up the rotary phone, you dial the fucking number, and you call up Glenn Danzig and ask him tons of stupid questions, and he sits there answering them for you. And so that concludes this week's episode of Facebook Evilive. That was a lot of fun. I want to thank Tony again for coming on and doing an interview. I saw Curtis pop up in here. Curtis, we got to get you. Let's do you on the next one, man. Curtis, you want to come on? We'll talk about let's talk about the Danzig show. That would be great. I tested out the system. I had Tony call on my cell phone and then put it real close to the mic. I don't know how it sounded, but it worked pretty well. So Curtis, if you want to come on, just send me a DM, and we'll get you on the air next week. And then we'll read part 3 of Little Fiend, which is after part 3. I have not read past part 3. So it will be a complete surprise. But I'll tell you, I read them so long ago that it's like reading it again for the first time. And it's just so interesting to hear. I love the way the guy touches on certain other things, which allows us to like sort of go in and fill in, this, that, and the other. But yeah, this is just another really fun, episode. I'm beat. I need to go outside. It's really nice outside. I didn't want to do this during the day, but this was the only time that Tony was available. I really wanted to have him on the show. Although I kind of like this slot from maybe next week we'll do 1 to 3. That's even better. 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. It's not 12, and that way, like the afternoon. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Rue says, "Thanks again. Till next time. Good to be safe and cough cool." That's right, Rue. Cough cool. Rue signing off there. So yeah, and then after we finish Little Fiend, if people like this format or if people are enjoying this sort of like analysis, there's a few other things that we can check out. And maybe we'll start trying to do some more interview stuff. I don't know. Maybe I can get someone on. Maybe I can get someone on the air. Actually, there's a couple of people I might be able to get on the air that might be interesting. I don't know. But listen, everybody have a good Saturday. Thanks for tuning in. Again, please, please, please. Curtis says, and Stephen Wigg has reminded me to join in. Stephen, I don't know if you're listening, but if you want to get in on, we can get a conference call going because Stephen was also there at the time. So Stephen and Curtis, I invite you both onto the show to have you on for a conversation. But let's try and maybe I want to keep it to about an hour, maybe an hour 10, because we're right now the broadcast has gone to 2 hours and 20 minutes, and I want to leave enough room for Little Fiend Part 3. It takes a while to read these things because there's so much blah 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 blah. Yeah, Steve. All right, so Steve and Curtis, please DM me on the They Came From Lodi page, okay? And we'll do that. And one last thing, please go to www.frumess.com, click on some AdSense people, please, for me. I know that sounds annoying, but yeah, man, the pennies in the AdSense account really help. So go click on some ads. Doesn't cost you a dime, helps me out. See you next week.